Our next speaker is Jarnuczak. He's going to talk about uploading proteomics data to PRIDE.
Hi everyone. Thanks for Jürgen and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. And I hope this is going to be an informative talk for everyone. And I'm going to be talking about sharing MaxQuant data with other scientists in the public domain using PRIDE database. So it's a short talk, but I kind of divided it into three parts. First, I want to give you an introduction to what is PRIDE, what we are and what we do, and what data we have. And then I will briefly touch upon how proteomics data is being reused. And then I finish off with a tutorial run through how to actually submit MaxQuant data to PRIDE. Okay, so I work at the European Bioinformatics Institute. And European Bioinformatics Institute is Europe's home to biological data. This is part of EMBL. And what we do is we store and share biological data. And we also do research in bioinformatics and computational biology. And also a big part of the organization is to run courses and training in bioinformatics and computational biology. So we are based on this campus, Wellcome Genome Campus in Cambridge, in this building you see in the background. And it's a really international organization. I think around 600 people are working there from 60 different countries. So PRIDE is part of the bioinformatics infrastructure at EBI. And this is one of, I think, 60 biological databases there. So for those of you who don't know, PRIDE stands for PRoteomics Identifications Database. And it's a leading database and archive for storing MS-based proteomics data. So we store raw data, we store peptide protein identification and quantification, virtually any type of information related to your experiments that you would want to archive. I should mention that we are primarily geared up to support tandem mass spectrometry approaches. So if you're talking about SRM, for example, of targeted, there are other databases that will handle your data better than us. But of course, PRIDE does not exist in isolation. And I think since 2014, we are part of the ProteomeXchange Consortium. And the consortium was basically set up initially by PRIDE and Peptide Atlas in order to simplify and streamline and standardize data submission and dissemination in proteomics. And it has been growing actually over the years steadily. So now we have 6 partners, massive in California. This is Peptide Atlas, the initial founders. Then recently we had JPOS joined in Japan, iProx in China, and last month it's Panorama Web in Panorama Public, I think, in Seattle. Okay, so now moving on to the actual data in PRIDE. So in terms of data content, right now we have over 9,000 data sets. And they are coming from close to 60 different countries and roughly 4,000 groups across the world. And we like the statistics. So the countries that we see the most actually data sets come in US, Germany, and China. But of course, Spain is also doing very well and definitely in the top 10 of our submitters. So overall, we have something like 600 terabytes of data on our servers, and this is all in 3 million files. So it's quite a lot of data. And I should also mention that at any one time, around 60% of all of that data is publicly available, so anyone can download it for free. Okay, and also another thing that I wanted to mention is that, well, since the beginning, we are seeing that we are growing. As you can see in this graph, that every month we get quite a lot of submissions. There are obviously peaks and valleys in there. Presumably in the valleys, that's where the scientists go on holidays. But overall, to give an example of the volumes, for example, so far in 2018, we are getting around 300 submissions every month. And since this is a MaxQuant summer school, I thought I'll go dig deeper into our database, and I run a few queries. So to see what software people say they are using when they submit data to us. And this is actually since the very beginning. So 26% of all of the submissions that we have basically mention MaxQuant. And actually, probably, if I run this query again from the time when MaxQuant was actually released, because it's maybe not fair from the very beginning, it's probably something like 30 or 35%. So it's a really big chunk of what we get. And it shows that really the community is really using MaxQuant heavily. And another graph I wanted to show on this slide is this comparison of data volume and data growth between proteomics, MS-based proteomics, and sequencing, in this case DNA sequencing. So what you can see here is that you see data from the amount of data from European Nucleotide Archive in red and proteomics in blue in pride. So there are two things to take away from this. Is first that proteomics has really caught up with sequencing world, and it's kind of growing in the same, exponentially in the same direction. So that's great. But the other thing, actually, if you see, this is on a logarithmic scale, and we are still an order of magnitude smaller, effectively, than the sequencing world. And the way I take it, the way I look at this, is that there is still a lot of scope for the field to grow. Okay, and that brings me to, so we have all of this data. Now, one thing that can be done with this data, and the reason why we store it, is actually that because it can be reused. But before I talk about this, there's a question I guess I had to answer to, I think we should answer, why should you submit your hard-earned, through blood, sweat, and tears data to a public repository so then everyone can have access to it? So there's a number of good reasons. One is that you kind of have to these days, is that because the major proteomics journals actually mandate that you submit your data to a public repository, and other journals, not necessarily proteomics, hardcore proteomics, but Nature and PLOS journals, for example, they heavily, highly recommend doing that. The other reason, which is really prosaic, but I think it's a very good reason, is that it's a really nice way to store and back up your data, submitting it to someone now who knows what they're doing, and they can do it for you. And the last two reasons are, I think, probably the most important in my opinion. So first, you actually really make your research more accessible and transparent and reproducible. And I think, after all, no one has anything to hide. And the last reason is that by making your data accessible to everyone, it has a big potential to actually increase your own impact. And the reason for that is that we actually do see that proteomics data is being reused. So basically, we know the circle of in life sciences, that you do experiments and then you interpret and then obtain some knowledge. And, this is all based on the fact that you always acquire new data. So basically, in this concept, it's not really to break the circle, but this is that you can try and come up with experiments of things to do with the data that already exists that are orthogonal to the, to whatever is out there. So it's not really about stealing someone's data or passing it as your own. It's more about orthogonal uses of data. And for example, proteogenomics studies are one example of that. Okay, and as I said, we do see that this is happening. So the simplest way to look at this is basically to look at how much data people are downloading from PRIDE each year. And you can see in this graph that this is basically growing. And for example, in 2017, we got about 300 terabytes of downloads from our servers. I just highlighted here some of the interesting papers that studies that people download, but there's a lot more. There's a huge variety. And I'm not going to go into a lot more detail about this at this point, but basically, if you're really interested, we've written two papers basically that they give a nice overview, and they might be a good point. They might be a good thing to read, for example, to get ideas of how to reuse data. So you can go ahead and have a look at those. Okay, and that brings me to the last part, which is basically a mini tutorial how to submit data to Pride. So you've done all the experiments, you have raw data, you cannot publish because the MCP is bugging you to submit data. No problem. You can go to our website. We actually develop a number of tools and libraries apart from just maintaining the archive, and one of those tools is the PX submission tool, so ProteomeXchange submission tool, and this is basically a Java-based GUI that will let you click through and submit data. We also have a programmatic way to do it through an FTP, so if you want to do this, you can contact us, but I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, so first, yes, as I said, it's a simple download. You download, you get the zip file. You just have to make sure you have Java installed and that it is added to your environment path. And like with Maxcont, you just unzip it and double-click on it, and then there you are. And now you are ready to submit your data. But before I talk about this, I just want to very quickly mention one thing that is often, we get questions about this. So in Pride, we have two types of submissions, complete and partial. And complete and partial doesn't mean that your data is incomplete. This is just a way for us to distinguish how we get our data. So in a complete submission, we actually get data in a standard file format. This can be MZTAP or MZ-IDENTML. And then you submit raw data or any other data. And the advantage of that is that this is in a standard file format. We can parse it very easily, visualize it, etc. And in principle, it's easier for others to reuse. In partial submission, you just basically submit your search results however way you want, in whatever format you have, which can be okay, but maybe makes more difficult life for people wanting to reuse it. So you get the tool, you log in. This is the kind of screen you are presented with at first. If you go in for Maxcont data, currently you have to select the partial submission. I hear from Jürgen that MZTAP actually export is work in progress. So maybe in the future you'll be able to do complete submissions. And then you click next. You are presented with the next screen, really simple. You have to fill in the details about your project, like title, keywords, and description, whatnot. Then next, that's a step where you are ready to actually upload your data. So you click Add Files. And for Maxcont, when you have your data from Maxcont, you of course need your raw mass spec data. And then what we say to people, zip up your text folder, which contains pretty much all the search results, quantification that you need. So that's the bare minimum. And then also, it's very good to add the MQPAR file and also experimental design template, because that will basically be metadata about the biological part of the experiment. So then you load that. Again, because this is a partial submission, this often trips people. This should be labeled as search rather than result, because result is basically another way of calling search in a complete submission. It's just a little thing. And then you load your data, and then you follow the steps through. They're quite easy. You just have to fill in some metadata about your submission, some ontology terms and things like that. And then you, in the penultimate screen, you are presented with this screen. Actually, at this point, you can export a summary of your data, of your submission. It will write this file called submission.px. You don't really need it, but it might be useful in the future. And then off we go. We load the data. Actually, I forgot to mention earlier that we also have, the tool uploads through an FTP, but we also pay, or actually EBI pays, to use this really cool fast file transfer protocol called Aspera. So if you're struggling with the upload speeds, you can look into Aspera, you can download it and use it for free, and it will really speed up things. And yeah, that's it basically. So, I mean, conclusions. Please submit your data to Pride. It will be in good hands. And I wanted to show the acknowledgements to all of you. Who, probably a lot of you already submitted data. So thank you very much. And this is the faces behind the team. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions about Pride uploads? Pride itself? For me, it's one of the most important aspects of proteomics data moving forward. I frequently download other people's work and check it, right? For example, Josh Kuhn yesterday mentioned he has these new columns, right? And he's going to upload those raw files to Pride, and I'm going to download them, and I'm going to compare his chromatography peak width to what I get in-house. And I'm going to do that in MaxQuant. And this is the thing that you get when you have something like a repository like Pride. Okay, we have a question.
Thank you for the talk. Is it possible to upload using like a script so that you can streamline this, or it has to be done with the interface?
No, it's possible. We can give you access to our FTP server directly, and then you can script it up and do it programmatically. The only thing is that when I mentioned you can export this submission.px file that contains the information about your submission. Whenever you do it programmatically, you also need that file. So you will also have to script. And it's not that complex, but it takes some, it can be tricky to get the formatting of the file correctly. But apart from that, you can do it. Thank you.